Hello, and welcome back to Aetheral Space 12.4, the Black Sheep. We are back.
Thank you. Tan, I have a question.
Absolutely.
I know we normally do Aether Lore questions at the end of the chapter, but I need to know because you revealed them last chapter. How would the Nebula stack up against CP9?
They would beat CP9, probably.
You think?
Yeah.
Even Lucci?
Probably.
Yeah, that's true. I guess the power level in Aetheral Space is pretty crazy. Oh, that's sick. Can any of them use the 6 body moves?
Tomfoolery would definitely know them if they're a martial art.
He would have the better version.
Yeah, he would have his own esoteric improvements on them.
They'd be like, let's see if you can keep with my finger pistol.
It's like, how did you finger pistol me there?
Pistol.
How did you use finger pistols from all the way over there?
Air pressure.
The air does not do as you ask it.
Tomfoolery.
It seems I'm one staircase removed from you.
In my head, he's just like a crankier buggy. A very cranky guy. He's like, what's so funny?
So yeah, Tomfoolery would know it, and Nebula 2 could find it out very quickly.
Perfect. Alright, you ready for Aether?
Yeah.
As the train rushed through the countryside, Ruth looked out the window. She'd expected a farming planet to be covered in orderly rows of crops, as far as the eye could see. But the reality was a little different. Most of the land seemed wild and unkempt, overgrown with trees and weeds, the railway cutting through it like a blade. The only exception to the mess were the farms themselves. They dotted the landscape, completely covered as if they were by massive bone-white domes. It was like gargantuan bubbles were protruding from the ground all around them, concealing the farms from view. "Ruth?" prompted Bruno. "You still with us?" She nodded. "I'm listening. Still don't get why we've come here to steal from the Supremacy, though." Fuck, what was his voice again?
I just got it as like a normal guy. He's just...
Unless we're after the crops.
Yeah, that's it.
Chipped in. He was sitting next to Ruth, his arms crossed as he looked over the table. The trains on Grand Rue weren't exactly built for luxury. They were cramped and slow, and so the entire team found themselves stuffed into a single compartment. Oh, that's a cute visual. Like they're all like wall to wall, like sitting, and their knees are folded up. Roman lingered outside the door like a bouncer, so at least he wasn't taking up space. But Alice, Ellis, Rex, and Ruth were all squeezed on the one side of the table. For some reason, nobody seemed willing to sit next to Bruno. Oh, maybe it was the insane plan he was in the midst of explaining. "As we are now," he said, "stealing from the Supremacy would be suicide." "It wasn't suicide before," Ruth said. "It was suicide before," Bruno replied. "But we just always got lucky. But I'd rather not rely on luck unless I have to, which is why we're here." "In the ass end of nowhere," Alice muttered. Indeed, Granwer wasn't exactly the center of galactic civilization. As a farming world, it was far beyond tertiary, and the last time a Supremacy official besides the Minister had visited was surely decades ago. Calling it the ass end of nowhere was actually pretty generous, since the ass was still part of the body. God damn! Rip? Fucking no one wants their wheat?
No,
Wow.
They've got enough. They don't care about Grammar.
Was still part... That's kind of a hard line. That's fucked up. Ah, man. "Actually," Bruno said, settling into his seat, "I did some jobs for the Providenza recently." The atmosphere in the small compartment thickened, and the people sitting across from Bruno grew tense. Mercenaries and bounty hunters were all part of the same criminal industry, of course. So there was no doubt they dealt with the Providenza family before, or at least heard of them. If only they'd heard good things. After the collapse of the Oliphant Clan, a massive power vacuum had been left in the criminal underworld. Organizations like the Crimson Carnival and Paradise Lost. Oh, that's... Fuck yes! I love seeing remnants of the old world show up in Aetheral Space as stories. Ah! It's so good. Is Crimson Carnival from something?
No. That's original.
Had quickly snatched up the hired gun sphere, but the Providenza now strove to replace the Oliphants as the general face of organized crime. Given their propensity for violence and their frankly unhinged levels of recruitment, the Providenza had managed to make quite the name for themselves in the last few years. "While I was on board with them, I had the opportunity to check out some of their files." Bruno leaned over the table, lowering his voice as if his former clients would hear him if he spoke too loudly. "Excuse me. They've got a scraping station here on Grand Row. Elias's eyes flicked up from his game, only for a moment, but enough to show that he was listening.
You were right that this is like Dragon's replacement, because like you even got a name that I keep calling him instead of his name.
Which is?
Ellis and Elias.
A scraping station? He mumbled. What's that? Rex turned his head to look at the boy, a cartoon smiley face appearing on his visor as he spoke. Information is worth its weight in gold to the right people, and the Providenza know that. A scraping station latches on to supremacy territory, scrapes off valuable information into it, records it, and then they sell it off to the highest bidder. Oh, so it's like scraping data, kind of.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Well, oh, sorry, I meant... you're right, that is literally what it is, but I meant, like, when you do that on, like, websites or apps, like, scrape data from your shit. Let's face it, Bruno said, leaning back in his seat and crossing his arms. For information like this, we're not going to be the highest bidder. They've got this old farm. Had to be abandoned by the previous owners because of blight, so they got it cheap. They've converted the whole place into a siphon station. Real scary security. He grinned. But not that scary. So how are they... Is it just, like, stealing stuff off their internet? Like,
it's like transmissions, basically. They intercept and, like... Ooh, this is interesting.
So all script messages, all internet...
Yeah. When it's being passed from, like, one outpost to another, basically.
I got you. So it's like a long-range torrent.
Yeah.
You know, they've got the soul... Sorry. So we're not stealing from the supremacy, Ruth nodded. We're stealing from the people who are stealing from the supremacy. She had to admit. She'd heard worse plans. But not many. It took me a second. Most of the people who made up the Providenza were, to put it simply, trash. Common goons who'd taken the family name for slivers of reputation and bragging rights. The names of members who could be considered real threats could be noted down on a single sheet of paper. Unfortunately, 3 of those names were at the scraping station. The ones they called the Black Sheep. Bruno and Serena knew them by reputation, if nothing else. Ordinarily, the Providenza would promote and reward those members who earned themselves a reputation for violence. The family was hungry for notoriety, after all, no matter how they found it. But there were certain kinds of violence the Providenza preferred for their advertisement. The sort of violence that didn't provoke a response they couldn't handle. I'm just now picturing their, like, raiding frenzy fields. It had happened around 6 months ago. By some unlucky coincidence, the Black Sheep had run into a group of special officers in a bar on Turnaz. The officers, 6 in all, there you go, had been on their way back from a mission. Bruno didn't know the exact details, but obviously there had been some kind of disagreement. A disagreement which had ended with the 6 special officers dead. Making the Supremacy special officers look like helpless victims, especially after the fiasco of the Elysian Fields incident. That was the kind of violence that provoked an unholy response. Small wonder the trio had come to be known as the Black Sheep. Small wonder they'd been sent out here to what didn't even qualify as the ass end of nowhere. Lucius Victory Providenza, Eros Matinee Providenza, and Anatrice Del Ced Providenza. Not a Del Ced that Bruno or Serena was familiar with, but the name itself was enough to make them wary. Anyone who'd managed to survive and graduate from the Ced was some kind of monster. For that reason, they'd warned the others to be wary of Anatrice most of all. The plan itself was simple. 3 breaching points, with their forces split between them. Most of the Providenza's foot soldiers didn't even have Aether, so they wouldn't pose much of a threat. Ruth and Rex would blast in from the top of the dome and descend at the receiver tower. Bruno and Serena would breach the loading bay and fight their way in from there. And this Alice, whose abilities Bruno still didn't know, she'd be going in from underground, using a disused drainage tunnel. Bruno would have been wary of sending someone in without any backup at all. The Alice kid didn't have Aether, apparently, but Ruth hadn't even blinked when he proposed it. Seemed this Alice wasn't someone to be worried about. The clock passed the hour, and, in the darkness behind a parked truck, Bruno brought his communicator to his mouth.
Go,
he whispered. The explosions followed soon after that. Alice's boots splashed against the dirty water beneath as she made her way through the dank drainage tunnel. Oh, this was gross. How had she ended up drawing the short straw like this? Someone at some stage must surely have cheated her. At least Elias's drone... Goddamn.
It's true.
At least Alice's drone was following Rex and Ruth and not her. This was something. That was something. This kind of environment wasn't the kind that Alice should be presented in. She was an innocent heroine that fought for justice and the dreams of children, not for the right to march through sewage. She glanced up towards the moss-ridden ceiling as she felt a rumble from far above. It seemed the boss lady had made a grand entrance. Alice briefly fantasized about how Alice would look descending from the top of the dome in all her cuteness. But some dreams would remain dreams forever. Alice shook her head. Alice! Or not, she had a job to do. Elias is...
Jesus.
Never. This guy cannot get it right.
It really is.
Thrown at the equipment needed to...
Once you have the Dragon roll, you get a second name.
Bruh. They needed for the records. So Alice, Bruno, and Serena weren't actually meant to head for the main receiver tower. Their job was to provide a distraction, draw the black sheep away from it, and keep them occupied for long enough that Alice could get what they needed. A distraction, huh? Well, it seemed like she'd managed that at least. A footstep splashing the water. In an instant, Alice pulled her plasma pistol free of its holster, pointing it forward into the dark maw of the tunnel beyond. Her hands did not shake, her gaze did not waver. She simply remained still but ready, like a turret, something that would automatically dispatch its target. "Show yourself," she said calmly. For a moment, the other party feigned non-existence, but soon enough they stepped out of the dark, hands raised in surrender. A young man with handsome features and curly pink-haired Jigglypuff? Cogent blue eyes twinkling in what little light the tunnel possessed. "Wow," he said, voice light and breathy. "You really noticed me right away, huh? You sure must train a lot."
But maybe not so deep, I would say.
Not so deep?
Yeah.
I'm just trying not to redo the so voice, because that's what my instinct is telling me to do. "Wow," he said, voice light and breathy. "You really noticed me right away, huh?
That's
You
it, yeah.
sure must train a lot." Alice recognized him from the files she'd been shown. Eros Matinee Providenza. I noticed Eros, as in, presumably, love/eroticism. Ooh. One of the black sheep. He was wearing the distinctive uniform of the crime family. Oh no. A fedora and trench coat. Each stark white with gold lining. Is he wearing that one guy from Ruby Fit?
No.
He seemed utterly unsuited to what was basically a sewer. But then again, so was Alice. "Oh, wow." Eros kept on talking even as Alice pointed her gun at him. "You have pink hair too. Can that even be a coincidence? We could be siblings. Maybe even lovers." Enchanté. I don't like that his next thought after siblings was lovers. "Ew. Sorry. He laughed casually. "That came out a little creepy, didn't it? I didn't mean it to sound that way, but you certainly have any right to take my comments any way you like. I wouldn't dream..." Oh my god, this guy is like listening to Twitter flirting. This is so bad. Oh my god, this is hurting me. "But you certainly have the right to take my comments any way you like. I wouldn't dream of telling you how to feel about things like that. Oh, I'm talking too much, aren't I? So embarrassing." He took a step forward. And Alice fired at the ground
this
before
guy.
him. He's so fun. He's literally a fuckboy, and it reads so well. Narrowly missing his foot, Eros blinked down at the smoking hole in the ground, surprised for the first time. His mouth a perfect "oh." The surprise lasted just a moment, though, and soon enough that dreamy grin returned to his face. "Nothing funny, buddy," Alice said. "No reason you need to get shot here. Put your hands on your head." "Boy, am I lucky, though," Eros giggled, his posture remaining utterly relaxed despite Alice's instructions. "The target I decided to go after at random turned out to be such a beautiful lady. I can't tell if it's a blessing or a curse." Oh, you got it. Did you just write Sanji? What is this? Make it stop. "Definitely a blessing," Alice smirked. "But flattery will get you nowhere, pal." Should she shoot him? Ordinarily, she'd have planted a shot right into his forehead already, but something about this situation didn't seem right. Given these guys' reputation, there was no way she should have seen him coming so easily. Was attacking him the trigger to his attack? Was he baiting her? Do you need a minute?
That's fine.
Okay. "No, I'm afraid you might be wrong," Eros sighed, looking sullenly down at the ground. "Not that I want you to feel bad about being wrong, but it's just that I have this thing, and I feel like I have to make it clear to you. How to say it without seeming creepy. It's just..." Alice's finger began to curl against the trigger. Bait or not, it was certainly getting hard to resist the urge to shoot this guy. Even if it was a trap, the sheer satisfaction might just make it worth it. I feel like I know where you're about to go with it, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm holding myself back. Out with it, Alice snapped. Even if she didn't end up taking this guy out, that was fine too. The longer he stayed here in the stalemate with her, the longer he wasn't at the receiver tower. It fit with the plan. It's just... He sighed again, twiddling his index fingers together. It's just... when I see a beautiful lady... Suddenly, his arms dropped limp to his side. His eyelids fell heavy over his eyes. His grin widened just a tad. Just enough to cross the boundary between friendliness and hunger. I can't help but kill them. His voice was heavy, shuddering, anticipating. It's coming. Growing up on the streets of a slum, Alice had quickly learned how to recognize the signs of incoming violence. It had been a vital survival skill among those who would kill you, some for your belongings, others for the fun of it. By this point, it was something of a sixth sense for her. This man was going to try and kill her just as he said. She was certain of it. In the next few seconds, a bead of sweat trickled down her forehead. I see, she said, voice steady, waiting for the attack that was sure to come. That's quite the complex you have there. Oh, you mustn't just misunderstand me, Eros said, arms swaying as he waved his hands. Please don't misunderstand me. It's not that I have a thing against women. No, not at all. Don't get it wrong. I have the greatest respect for the fair sex, the utmost admiration. It's like how you have to close your eyes rather than look directly at the sun. You're far too dazzling for my eyes. I have to remove you from my sight. In that way, it's an act of self-defense on my part. I know that's no excuse, of course, but I just wanted to make sure you had a full understanding of... This is trying to stop himself from being canceled.
in the sewer, in a fight.
Yeah! Bait or not, she couldn't listen to this crap any longer. Alice pulled the trigger. Bang! As the plasma shot sliced through the air towards Eros, he leapt up and, with a flash of dazzling pink aether, feathered wings burst out of his shoulder blades. Those wings were the same pink shade as Eros' aether, and a single flap sent him soaring up towards the ceiling of the tunnel, dodging Alice's second and third shots. Oh, does he have like a Cupid theme? Is he gonna have like a bow? Eros looked down at Alice with his glittering blue gaze, his pink wings holding him aloft. That's so strange, he said wonderingly, narrowing his eyes. I just don't know if I get it, sweetheart. I'm certain you're an Aether user, but all you've been doing is firing that gun at me? Oh! Could it be you're trying to bait out my abilities? That would be such a coincidence. If that's the case... He jerked a thumb towards the wings behind him. Then we're birds of a feather. Bad puns aside, the creep was dead on the money. The fact that he dodged meant that he didn't have the counter ability Alice had been worried about. But that didn't mean she could attack carelessly. Best to hold back and see what he was capable of first. What's wrong, cutie? Eros asked sweetly, cocking his head as his wings carried him back and forth across the ceiling. I miss your voice. It was like an angel. All ladies are angels, of course. But even by that metric, your voice was truly pleasant. I needed to stop, Dan. I need you to cut the count down. This is what we needed 15 pages for?
Yes.
No. You're not like other girls at all. You seem a little more... Oh, what's the word? Genuine. That's it. Not that I'm trying to say other girls are fake, but... To hell with it. With all the speed and precision she could muster, Alice fired off another volley of shots, this time aiming directly for Eros' wings. The mobility difference was going to be a problem. Even if the attack missed, Eros' response to it would be enlightening. Right as Alice fired, Eros swooped down, weaving through her shots and getting right into her face. The light of his aether coalesced in his hands, forming a regal pink bow. I knew it!
This guy.
Cupid theme! Cupid theme! And without hesitation, he pulled the string back. The shining arrow aimed directly for Alice's throat. Star Train, he purred. At this range, with this time, Alice ordinarily wouldn't have time to dodge. She abandoned that notion immediately. Instead, she pointed her pistol directly off to the side. Restructure! As she pulled the trigger, another plasma shot, far more explosive than the previous, burst out of her pistol, the momentum sending her flying out of the path of Eros' arrow. The projectile, Star Train he'd called it, screeched like its namesake as it sailed off down the tunnel, pink light fading into the distance. Oh, hang on, I need water.
No problem.
Alice landed, transitioning into a roll as she pointed her gun at Eros again. Far down the tunnel, she heard the boom of an explosion. Whatever star train had hit had surely been obliterated, judging from that noise. Good to know. It wasn't an attack she could afford to be hit by. Eros wasn't done, though. Without hesitation, he swung his bow around Alice's new position, and, ducking under another pair of shots, fired his arrow once again. Another star train. What had worked once would work again. Alice fired her explosive shot, sending herself flying out of Eros's range once more. It was only when she saw the smirk on the Cogitant's lips that she realized that it had been a mistake. "Baby cruising love," he said. Immediately, the arrow he'd fired popped into countless tiny duplicates, like shotgun pellets, and they turned in the air to follow Alice's new trajectory. A homing scatter shot. Alice wouldn't land in time to dodge them. "Restructure!" Still sailing through the air, Alice pointed her pistol towards the incoming arrows, at which she pulled the trigger. A cone of flame belched forth, incinerating the projectiles before they could reach her. I'm assuming restructure like changes the components of the pistol and stuff, and what's in it to be like what's needed. Saved as she landed feet first on the ground, kicking up filthy water as she slid backwards. "Oh, wow," Eros commented, fluttering over the ground. "Oh, that's really so interesting. I could have sworn that was a standard Matek TD9 pistol you're holding, like a Tech 9. We added a couple things to it, Dan.
It's his own thing.
I'm sure. But yet you're using things like explosive shots and even a flamethrower. Did you perhaps modify it? Oh, but there's no signs of tampering on the exterior casing. It's good as new. How strange, how strange. Oh, could it be?" With frightening speed, he moved, lunging right at Alice. She fired the flamethrower again, but he kicked off the ground, launching himself up and over her while the flames poured forth. "Your ability," he said, landing behind her with a splash, "is to restructure the inside of an object and change its function. Am I right?" Damn it, he's right on the money! Alice swung around, already restructuring the inside of the plasma pistol once more. But Eros was already coming for her again. I thought it was a punch-point pistol.
There's plasma.
Who's the one who had the punch-point weapons earlier?
I don't know whether someone specifically had punch-point weapons before.
Oh, I know what I'm thinking of. I'm stupid. He discarded the bow, instead holding just the shining arrow in one hand like it was a dagger. His eyes wide and wild, he thrust it towards her chest. "Sweet refrain," Eros whispered, and mid-thrust, the arrow extended itself into a spear of pink light. No time to restructure the gun and fire an explosive shot. Alice moved as much as she could in the instant afforded to her, and so the spear impaled her through the shoulder rather than the heart. Hot agony pulsed through her as he pinned her to the tunnel wall, but that was fine. She'd accepted that already. So long as she'd managed to bring this guy in close, she could accept the pain. The arm that had been impaled was no good, but with the other she lashed out. The move was good, and he didn't see it coming. Before he could retreat, she'd seized Eros by the throat and began to squeeze, bones creaking under her grip. He went to pull the spear free to fend her off, but Alice tensed her skewered shoulder further, holding the weapon in place. He kicked at the air in vain as she raised him up, his pupils shuddering, his mouth opening and closing like a goldfish as he choked. Their aether, twin shades of pink, warred in the grim darkness of the drainage tunnel. She had him, she'd kill him. She'd take this little creep's spindling neck and her grip loosened. The strength had suddenly drained from her fingers. Eros glanced at her, his eyes twinkling, the choking sounds he'd been making slowly transforming into a low and sinister giggle. The hand that had been holding Eros like a vice became limp and impotent, slipping down his collar and swaying uselessly into the air. "Oh," he said, his voice filled with mock surprise. "Could it be you fell for me?" Alice glared at him, willing her body to keep fighting, but something was wrong. The tension in her shoulder slackened away to nothing, and the spear slid free of the bloody wound. It felt like there was something on her body, something crawling along the surface of her throat, drawing blood, making it difficult to breathe, something sharp. Eros's wings appeared once more, and as Alice collapsed forwards onto the floor, he leapt backwards, keeping himself at a distance. "You thought you'd drawn out my abilities, didn't you?" "Ugh," he purred. "I can understand why you'd think that. It's a natural conclusion to make after the exchange we just had. But these arrows are really just light shows, sweetheart. Something to distract you. My real ability is invisible and odorless." Alice drew in a harsh, struggling breath. "Poison!" she hissed through burning lips, her face half submerged in the sewer water as she lay on the floor. Eros threw his arms out. "Perfume!" he declared. "That is the name of my ability. I'd already completed my attack before our little lover's spat began. Sorry, darling, but I'm afraid I tricked you." "Bastard! I'll kill you!" Alice growled, She pushed her body to power through the poison, planted her hands against the filthy ground to force herself up, but another sudden burst of pain sent her sprawling back down to the ground. That infuriating giggle of Eros has echoed up and down the tunnel, along with the beats of his wings. He was still keeping his distance, sticking near the opposite wall, taking into account the possibility she still had a way to attack him. Somehow, the fact that he was so damn good at this made him even more annoying. Sorry. By the way, he said, smiling, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but perfume requires a certain trigger before it can activate. Hostility. The more hostility you feel towards me, the more potent the poison becomes. Perhaps you took my words too much to heart. So, Alice seethed, glaring up at him with a filth-stained face. Everything you've been doing and saying? An act just to piss me off? Eros cocked his head, a deep frown on his face as if he didn't understand what she just said in the slightest. What do you mean? He asked. I think you might have the wrong idea. I'm actually a very genuine person. For all the good it does to me. Eros shrugged as he sighed despondently. Whenever I get talking to anyone, they just die all on their own. Well, at least he was smart enough to make use of how unbearable he was. But seriously? God damn it! This isn't me when I die in Fortnite. This was such a pain. Such an unbearable pain. Alice squeezed her eyes shut, both out of frustration and to stop the water stinging them, and grit her teeth. I really, she muttered, didn't want to. Oh, Tan, your mic's suddenly very loud. What happened?
I don't know, I've not done anything.
Oh no. If you're trying to lure me in to finish you off, Eros said casually, no, mockingly, don't bother. I'm perfectly happy to watch you die from here. A lady should die with more dignity anyway. Consider your memory. After all... A thunderbolt of pink aether flashed through the tunnel, cutting Eros off as he retreated back further, planting himself against the wall. The source of the energy was the girl that should have been dying on the ground. Slowly, as if invisible fingers were pinching at her back, she floated up into the air, her arms and legs dangling below her. The theme song is playing. Those eyes opened again, and now they were blazing with pink light. I didn't want to use this here, Alice finished. It doesn't fit the genre at all. With feral speed, Eros aimed his bow at her, a new arrow already appearing ready to fire. What are you? Magical... Oh, sorry. Magical miracle girl, Alice! Light devoured the tunnel, and Eros was forced to bring his arms up or else be blinded. He tried to bring his wings to bear, to retreat further down the tunnel and away from the wall, but the wind was far too immense. Blasts of air pressure were bursting forth from the pink aurora of aether before him, growing faster and faster, like a heartbeat slowly rousing itself back to life. What was this? And there were sounds. Tearing fabric, joyful music, burning meat, popping bubbles, snapping bones, twinkling stars, with a final tremendous wave of pressure that pressed Eros' back hard against the wall. The phenomenon ceased. He panted for breath. Those final few blasts had been so immense that he had no choice but to increase his infusion in order to avoid being crushed. He'd made it through. He'd made it through unscathed. So why did he feel this fear? This horrible, instinctive sensation, like someone was dragging their nails across his bones. The pink afterglow began to clear, and he knew the source of his terror. There, floating in the air where the lady had just been, was something that was not human. It was a young girl, looked like a young girl, a good few years younger than the woman had been, clad in a pink and white dress. The costume cascaded downwards with frills like a wedding cake, oversized white buttons forming a vertical line down the center. Her skin was a stark white like porcelain, and her pink hair and eyelashes glowed intensely, drowning the tunnel in toxic light. At the bottom of the dress, no legs emerged, just two black tapered points like those of an insect hovering just over the ground. So this is like Powerpuff Girls art style. Okay. It looked human, certainly, but in the same empty way as Scarecrow did. Did you make her an anime girl? Is that what this is?
She's a magical girl.
It was like something had crawled out of one of those old children's videographs and into the real world. A doll, or perhaps a taxidermied corpse. That thing looked at him with blank white eyes. Oh, God! Oh, is that a spine for her wand?
Hmm.
This does not look like a magical girl, Tanhoney. This looks like... Oh, my God! I can see the little legs. What the fuck? This looks like a horror game antagonist. This is terrifying. Oh my god. That's what it looks like?
Yeah.
Why are the hands so small? Tan, what's happening? I'm scared. I can't look away from it. It's like terrifying me.
Credit
What
to
the
Wendigo,
fuck?
of course.
What the fuck? Wendigo scared me. What? Eros chuckled, floating hesitantly across from her, slowly moving to the left, to put even more distance between them. You think you've changed anything by taking this form? I admire your optimism, sweetheart. It becomes you, but should I make her voice creepier?
It was like a high-pitched monotone, I would say.
Something like this. Hello?
More robotic,
Like
I would
that?
say.
You're asking
No.
a lot of me. I don't know how I could
Just
do
like
that.
high-pitched, but not... There's no emotion at all, basically. Like a robot.
Miracle pop. Like that? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll make it happen. The girl pointed her arm towards him, and now, for the first time, Eros saw that she was holding something. A scepter. The staff was white, segmented and curved like an albino centipede, and at the top of the implement rested a glowing pink sphere. An aether armament? Even if it was, that didn't mean... Miracle! The girl's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, yet her tones were as unnaturally smooth as the rest of her, like an auto-tuned song, utterly without sentiment. Oh, it's like a Vocaloid. Not that he had time to consider that. Pop! Eros was slammed into the wall again, and this time he couldn't avoid being crushed. He felt one arm crunch as it took the brunt of the blow, and when the impact forced his mouth open, a spurt of blood came flying out. The taste of metal lingered in his mouth. What had happened? What the hell was that? It was as if he'd been punched by an immense invisible fist. The girl hadn't even moved. There was no way she could move. Painfully, his teeth chattering with fury, Eros pulled himself out of the wall, chunks of debris falling around him. He looked up at the girl with bloodshot eyes. My perfume's still affecting you, he hissed, nostrils flaring. I can feel it inside you. Just because you got a little stronger doesn't mean it's not still killing you. The girl just stared at him, until she opened her mouth to reply. He wasn't even sure she'd heard him. The great heroine of justice, Alice, cannot be affected by an evil power like that, she said emotionlessly. It was naive of you to think so, wicked servant. Eros furrowed his brow. What? I see you do not understand. Then I shall explain. She kept going like a robot. Miss Puree's aether ability of justice is called restructure. As you surmised, it gives her the ability to alter the interior of objects in order to change their function. Eros wiped some of the blood from his nose with the back of his good hand. This was good. Whatever this ability was, it could only do so much against his. If he could just keep her talking, Perfume would eventually catch up and incapacitate her again. So what? He muttered. Miss Puree has used restructure on herself, the girl declared, and for the first time she blinked those empty eyes. From now until the ability deactivates, her body is restructured utterly. It is nothing but a pure conduit for the generation of aether. So is she like false awakening?
Basically.
She cocked her head, the movement jerky like a puppet in the hands of an amateur. Your evil power targets the respiratory system, doesn't it? So it's like in exchange a different personality takes over and like the ability ends and the aether comes back out after. Okay. That respiratory system no longer exists. As I said, the forces of darkness cannot hope to stand against Alice, the friend to all children. Your attacks will no longer affect me. The explanation is at an end. Miracle pop! Before Eros could so much as register that she was done, he was struck by another invisible blow. His body sent flying down the tunnel end over end, one leg twisted nearly 180 degrees. As he landed in the filthy sewer water, though, he did not scream, nor did he try to flee. No, Eros Matinee remembered. How dare you? It was always like this, no matter what he did. Oh, are you still there?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
I'm here.
Hang on. Sorry, my headphones went out.
Okay.
It's coming back now. Are you with me?
Yeah, I never went.
Perfect. It was always like this, no matter what he did. Opening yourself up to others just meant exposing yourself to pain. To so many, the human heart was nothing but a target to stab at. Tan wrote this after we played Fortnite, I'm almost positive.
After you give me the
Yeah,
ice.
he understood it, and yet he couldn't help himself. It was the nature of a human being to seek comfort in others. Perhaps that male loneliness was his undoing. How dare you! Each time, hope that was so quickly betrayed. It had been the same back in that bar on Turnaz. They'd been on top of the world. They'd become a part of the Providenza family. They'd found somewhere they belonged. That special officer, that lady. He just smiled at her. He just nodded at her. How dare you! He hadn't expected anything back. He hadn't wanted anything back. All he desired was for his heart to make contact with another, if only for a moment. Was that such a sin? Two ships crossing in the night, parting with the fond memory of their brief connection. Was that such a crime? How dare you! It was only for a second, but still far too long. Before he'd even know what was happening, his hands were
Oh, you missed one.
already wrapped
You
around his
skipped
throat.
one.
I did?
Uh.
Oh, I'm so sorry. He'd been satisfied. Truly he had. It was only when he'd gone back to his table, only when he'd glanced back around, only when he'd seen that look. It was the same look every time, when they thought he couldn't see them. That flash, disdain, disgust, as if he couldn't see, as if he didn't know. How dare you! It was only for a second, but still far too long. Before he'd even known what was happening, his hands were already wrapped around her throat, wringing the life out of her. But that wasn't something he felt bad about. What else could it be called if not self-defense? Oh, he's like a giga in.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Eros reared up, shaking with fury. How dare you! He screamed, gripping his heart with his hand. I really liked you, you stuck-up bitch! With all the strength he had, Eros kicked himself up into the air with his good leg, flying high, higher even than the so-called magical girl. Pink aether crackling around his body, Eros summoned his bow once more, but this time the armament was much bigger, 3 times its size, almost dwarfing the cogitans as he aimed at his target. The structure of the arrow was completely forgotten. Hang on. Instead, a focus of energy like a cannonball appeared on the shining bowstring, ready to be pulled, taut, and let loose. Magic of love! Eros screamed. Miracle melt, said the girl. Eros reached to pull the bowstring back, but found himself unable. It was only natural that he found himself unable, though. After all, it would be difficult to pull a string without fingers. His hands were falling apart, his knuckles were bubbling. He opened his mouth to scream, but his tongue was already pouring from his lips. His last thoughts were nothing profound. My skin! It's burning my... Eros Matinee, robbed of structure, fell back to the earth as red water, and mingled with the rest of the filth already running underfoot. Enchante, whispered Miracle Magical Girl. Alice, Alice! And soon enough the light died. This is horrifying. This is very different than Ty, but I kind of love it. I don't think she will ever have a follow-up.
This is why. This is why she doesn't have luck.
Oh, no. That is so cool. Oh my god, that's terrifying! Scary ability. Oh, man. Alright. Wow, I don't even know where to go with that. Let's look at the Aether thread for questions. That was hard on my throat.
I'm impressed you got through it all.
You're gonna have to do the podcast.
Sure.
Okay. I think you've already answered this, but we might as well go over it again.
Okay.
Ari Ross asks, are gene tyrants born? Can they have relatives like a sister or cousin, but not in the complete genetic sense, given that they change their DNA so often? Is there like a baseline code in their DNA that doesn't change and identifies individuals? Do all the cells in their body retain their memory individually?
A lot of questions. I'll answer the first one. So basically, there would have been an original generation of gene tyrants who previously were something else. And
people.
Yeah. And after that, they would have then just made new gene tyrants when more were required.
Yeah. Although after a point, they did the reboots later because they were like, they didn't want too many, right?
Well, yeah, sometimes... Well, once they're at a certain level, there's a limit on how many numbers they can have, generally.
Right. Because I remember, before Gene Tyrants, everyone was just humans.
Yes.
There were no aliens discovered. Then Gene Tyrants came and they fucked with everybody's genetics, and that's why we have all the different, like, sub-races and stuff.
Yes.
Oh, man. That's crazy. Just thinking of, like, the first nerd in the lab who's like, oh, I won't abuse this power. I'll use it to be a hero of justice. Oh, that's so fucked up. Who was the first Gene Tyrant? Tell me that.
No.
What?! Is it gonna come up later?
It would have been the Lord Director Eve.
Lord Director Eve?
Yeah, who was like the original one and never rebooted.
Did they come up with the technique, or were they like the test subject?
They were the inventor and the test subject.
Interesting. What was their goal in making that technology?
Survival.
From what?
Of the species, because they'd fucked everything up.
On Earth?
Yeah.
That's so cool. Alright, well, I think we are good to go. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you freaking next time.
Enchante.
Enchante.
Bye!